Welcome on to the next edition of Down the Comrades Marathon Podcast. My name is Brad Nadalt. I've got the coach Lindsey Parry with us once again. Lindsey, we are starting to get into a bit of crunch time territory. Lots of qualifiers happening. We had a whole bunch of people qualifying yesterday. Big one coming up this weekend in Jeppe, the first of the Ballwin Marathon Series. There's 4 of those coming up, 3 in the next sort of 3 weeks. I've got one in 2 weeks from now. So I've grabbed myself a cup of coffee, because we are talking specifically about whether you've qualified or haven't qualified and what you should be doing. And I'm in an interesting position now, and I've actually got a question that I want to ask you when we start this podcast. So obviously, Comrades have changed the qualifying criteria from 450 back to 5. I had run a 458 at the Cape Town Marathon, so I have inadvertently, I don't even know what the word is, qualified in retrospect. Don't know if that's it. But does that mean I can start tapering now?
Yeah, that's what you did for your first Comrades Marathon. Do you remember how that worked out for you? Although that wasn't so much out of choice, but you were so sore after that first marathon. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. So that means I do still have to run the Peninsula Marathon next weekend. Is that what you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, and human beings are human beings. So I can already predict that a ton of people will just fill the space. You know, if you don't need to run under 4 hours 50, suddenly way more people will run 455 to 459. We're good at filling space. Look, the original decision to knock it down to 450 was to improve the finishing stats, and it worked. Comrades have decided it's more inclusive, etc., and that's great. Let's get more people involved. But really, all I'm trying to say is that now that we are literally in qualifying season, you said it, a couple of races coming up over the next few weeks, is because you are what I consider early qualifiers, I would still try for my best possible Comrades. And certainly a sub 450 gives you a better chance of finishing than a sub 459. And a 459 is not terminal. So if you only just make it under 5 hours, that does not mean that you are not going to finish Comrades. It puts you at more risk. It puts you more on the borderline of not finishing. But what it does do is that for the, let's call them the missing middle. So, you know, we emphasized at the start of the series that qualify when you're ready. So what this does allow is that someone who's capable of a 445, 450, who needs to qualify later because they're not ready to qualify, can definitely now kick that can down the road, knowing that they don't have to break themselves to get under 450. They can go and run 459, and that'll be it's definitely harder than they should be doing a training run, but it won't totally break them, which means the recovery time afterwards is shorter. So there are definitely some advantages to it, which is great. But yeah, I think that the more important thing is what it does do is it brings us into this discussion around people who qualified last year, people who are going to be qualifying imminently, and then, of course, people that need to qualify later. And what do those things look like, and how does it change the original conversation that we had around where to from here and what should we be doing now? Because we've effectively closed out the first month of the year, and now we're moving into that second month of the year's training.
Yeah, I'm glad you say 459 is not terminal, because 458 means I'm styling. That is for sure.
As both of our fathers told us when we went to university, is if we get 51% means you're ignoring your friends.
Exactly. Well, Lindsey, let's talk about that now. The sort of qualifying versus not qualifying. I mean, we've been speaking a lot over the last few weeks about the consistency and just making sure you've got the base. And January's pretty much been that. We haven't really focused on much else, but now it's like starting. You almost like on 2 different paths, essentially, if you'd like, of where to go. And that's where we're at. We're at this like crossroads now, if you'd like. Talk us through whether you have qualified versus haven't qualified, and where we should be right about now.
Yeah, so the easier one is the qualified. You qualified, you had an okay December, you've gotten properly consistent in January, but you haven't gone overboard with the miles. And now we're getting to February, and we just start to drift everything up that little bit, adding 5 or so kilometers a week onto the long run, so that when we hit March, you're really starting to get into that kind of peak phase of training. So February is all about ramping it up just a little bit, possibly looking at adding in a little bit of intensity, which we covered last podcast or the podcast before. That's when you'll start to put in those intensity workouts, the hill workouts, particularly for the bull run and faster metals. That becomes more important. And then you're going to just slowly drift towards that point on the 1st of March, which is Comrades season. That's when Comrades training physically starts. So that's the path for February for the people that have qualified. And then obviously we got people that are about to qualify, which means that you're going into a taper phase imminently, either this week or within the next 2 weeks. So you've come through your peak training for the marathon. Now you're freshening up for the marathon. You need to recover properly from the marathon. And the good news is for this kind of group that's going to qualify all the way up to about the 16th, maybe even the 22nd, but that might differ slightly depending on how sore you are after. But let's call it up to the 16th for sure. You will be qualified and ready to start on the 1st. So if you're qualifying literally this weekend or the weekend after, that's it. I would still follow the similar path to the qualified. The next 3 weeks will be different, but 1st of March, you're AFR away and you're going. And then we get to the next group, which is qualify when you're ready, or qualifying right at the end of February, beginning of March. And then that will differ slightly, because we've gone over this so many times already that your single biggest threat to not finishing Comrades is getting injured. And one of your very high risk periods for getting injured is immediately after qualifying, if you start training too soon. So if you're qualifying after the 16th of February, certainly if you're qualifying in the first week of March, and the later that gets, the more important it becomes to just take a step back, recover from that qualifying effort, and then when you are ready and all the signs are there, remember we spoke about if you soar for 1 to 2 days, that means you're probably going to be back training, a couple of light, easy runs within 4 to 5 days. If you still soar on day 3 or 4, we need to make sure we don't do any running for a week, and then some not low intensity, low impact cycling, swimming, that type of thing, exercise to get us back up to speed, and then you will start training. And in that scenario, you'll probably only start training full on again around about the beginning of April. And we should probably then just chat in the next 2 or 3 podcasts, Brad. We should just have a chat around what to do around oceans and how that changes things a little bit.
Cool. I'll definitely add that into our list of what we need to chat about. But Lindsey, it's interesting you talk about those who have and those who aren't ready yet. And we've seen 1 or 2 questions and comments coming through already, folks picking up the odd little injury, but there's a lot of people panicking already that they're even thinking February's they're not going to be ready to qualify. And I think it's important to say up front as well that this is, in cricket terms, this is a test match. It's not a T20. Like, it doesn't have to get done in February. If you're not ready to qualify in February, I mean, you've spoken about it already in the past, you're talking about it again today, then February is not the time you're qualifying. I mean, the qualifying window is until the first weekend in May, I think it is. Yeah. So there's still a long time to qualify. It's not ideal leaving it that late, but if that is the trajectory that you're on, then so be it.
Absolutely. And the one thing that we know from Comrades over years and years of doing this, Brad, is that you are better off doing too little than too much. That's a fact. So in these cases where people have to qualify quite late, I often find that they actually run quite good Comrades, because that build-up is pushed out. They don't start training too hard early in the year. And then when they do that qualifying race, typically it's a training run / qualifying race. And so they just don't have this huge amount of fatigue built up in their legs, and they tend to run quite well at Comrades. The most stressful thing about that is that if it's your last chance to qualify and something goes wrong, you get sick, there's a family emergency, there's the 50-year storm hits and the race gets cancelled. That's actually your biggest stress about leaving it to 99. And then, as we've also discussed a couple of times, is that not everybody is fortunate enough to have the ability to go and jog a 5-hour marathon. For some people, a 4:58, 4:59 takes everything. But then there are ways of managing that. And I still think that there's no point in qualifying until you're ready, because whether you're trying to qualify on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th of May, or whether you're trying to qualify on the 22nd of February, the most important thing is that you actually qualify. So do it when you're ready to qualify, because then you give yourself the best chance of actually standing on the start line.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Speaking of these coffee mugs, Lindsey, we had a really cool review that was left on Apple Podcast from Addison Jeffries. Addison, we're going to send you a Coach Perry coffee mug. Those aren't available anywhere else, by the way. So the only way you can get them is through something like this, which is, I think, is pretty cool. We'll get it off in the mail. It won't be the mail because the mail system doesn't work here in South Africa. We'll pop it on a courier, if that's okay. Addison, it should be on its way shortly. We have been in touch to get your address. So there we go. Thank you for leaving that review on Apple Podcasts. It does really help put this podcast in front of other Comrades runners just like you. Lindsey, I was looking ahead to this weekend as well. Obviously, it's the first of the Bullwind Series marathons, the Jeppy Marathon happening this weekend. But there's also a race, and I've never heard of it, actually, funnily enough, but I'm never in that part of the world, so that's probably why. And it's the Jock of the Bushveld 4-in-1, and I thought to myself, oh, no, here's another one of these. Run every single race that's there. It's like, but it turns out it's not. Thankfully, it's just 4 different race distances. They all start round about the same time, so you can't run them all. But there are a few of those races that I know you're a huge fan of, inverted commas, where you run a 10, a 42, and a 21 all in one day. And that leads me into our long runs and sort of planning out what we should be doing, because we've been getting that question quite a bit, is sort of how many marathons should we be running? How many ultras should we be running? Are races like the Cosmos 3-in-1 worth doing? So let's talk about beginning of February. Obviously, we need to plan logistically and how we're going to do this from a long run perspective. What is key to Comrade success when it comes to long runs?
Cool. So I've got a really nice rule of thumb that just works so well. And that is that we want to do 3 runs of 42 kilometers or longer. Okay. That is the magic formula. It does get compromised by the sheer volume of races that we've got available on our calendar, and then back to the scenario of qualified versus unqualified. But absolutely, if you have qualified, you're in the driving seat, and it is a 42 Ks to a maximum of 55 kilometers, well, 56 if you're doing oceans, but we won't split hairs about a K. But I don't really like people going beyond 55 Ks. But that's it. 3 of those split a minimum of 3 weeks apart, and a month is a good distance. So if we work that backwards from our long run, which for the majority of the field should be at 5 weeks. So if you go 5 weeks back from Comrades, which I think is the 3rd of May, I should have just looked at that on a calendar. That's not too difficult to do. But that's what there we go. My maths isn't too shabby. It's the weekend of the 3rd, 4th of May. That's when most people are going to be doing their Comrades long run. And then we want to go 3 to 4 weeks back, training marathon, 3 to 4 weeks back, training marathon and or ultra. But that's in terms of the real major long runs. Those are the ones that we want to do. And as we discussed in the I think it was last week's podcast, actually, it might have been 2 weeks ago, that we discussed the fact that the easy runs need to be easy enough, and that at Comrades we actually do run slower than even our easy runs. And these are the races where we actually want to put that into play, because these are the races that we're going to be testing out our shoes, our socks, the running kit that we're going to run in on race day, any nutrition that we're going to use, suntan lotion, Vaseline, taking notes of where you chafe, how things are different, where do you hurt differently when you are running at that paces. It's where you're going to practice your run walk strategy. So those are the 3 runs that we want to do that at. Now, obviously, for a lot of people who are about to qualify, that's probably going to turn that number into 4. I would actually prefer it if you still, even though it's a bit earlier than when the other people are going to be doing their sequence, I would just start my sequence later. So I would still count this marathon effort as 1. And then you will do 5 weeks out, and then 4 weeks before that. So then you'll still only have 3, and it's enough. The long run doesn't do tons to physically prepare you for what you're going to do at Comrades. There's enough kilometers and there's enough running in the consistency and the strength training that you're doing that will get you to Comrades. The long run builds your confidence and it allows us to test. So those are the two main functions of doing those long runs. They actually do not physically prepare. They actually do more damage than good on that front. But I recognize that it's very difficult to go from doing nothing and then doing a marathon and then going and doing Comrades. Although I've got quite a few people that have to do that just because of circumstance, and they finish Comrades and they love Comrades. Comrades, South Africans have really gotten into the trap of more is better, more is better. And again, I must just emphasize that goes for 90 to 95% of the field. Of course, you've got the 5% silver finishers that probably need to do a little bit more than that, and they will probably be doing between 5 and maybe 6 times over the 42 marathon distance. But for the majority of the field, it's just enough to know how it impacts your body and to mentally be like, actually, that's getting better. It's improving. Each time I do one of these, I feel better. I'm getting a better handle on what works for me and what doesn't work for me. And that also then allows us to spend a lot of time in between training well. We're not finding ourselves continuously needing to recover from doing really long runs.
Yeah, Lindsey, it's interesting. You spoke about 55Ks as the limit of the long run. And if you're doing oceans, you're not going to stop somebody where they can see the varsity and then it's time to go home. You can actually go get your medal. But let's talk about going longer, because there is a school of thought that believes that you need to do longer for Comrades. And you say these long runs from a physical perspective don't prepare you as much as you think they would. It's more of a mental and confidence thing. Surely if that is the case, then by going longer, it gives you more confidence. If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury-free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsey and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K, and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
It does give you more confidence. I'm not gonna debate that, but it brings the risk of injury back into play. It brings the risk of being too tired and not being able to get the most out of your training in the weeks that follow that exercise into play. It increases your risk of getting sick because you really just mow down your immune system by doing a very hard physiological thing on your body. And let's not forget also that particularly when we get into the long run in sort of May, is that it's starting to get cold and dark in large parts of South Africa. So you're only putting yourself in a position where you might be being exposed to the elements for longer than you need to be, or having to start in the dark and run in the dark for longer than you might should, stepping in a hole, hurting yourself. There's just so many disadvantages to doing this long run too long, and the one single advantage you've got is that you improve your confidence. That's it. That would be my argument to people who firmly believe that you need to do more, and that are stuck in this thing that you have to be able to do it. Psychologically, you've got to know that you can do it. For me, I've finished Comrades 6 times. That's enough. I know I can finish Comrades. That's not the issue. I just know I have to prepare properly, and when I get there, I'm going to finish Comrades. That's really the argument that I would use against it. And the longer you make that run, the longer you're going to take to recover from it. I think that's super important to remember. So, if you're insistent on doing a 60K, because that was just a number that someone decided in the 1970s that 60Ks is a number, and then we've been stuck with it ever since. But if you're going to do 60Ks, or one year I did 64 Ks, man. I mean, that was my worst Comrades to date. I had to walk most of the way to the finish line because I dislocated a bone in my foot on the day. So yeah, it takes you longer. So then if you're going to do that long, I would go 6 weeks before, because you're definitely going to have an issue recovering from 64 Ks, no matter how easy you do it.
Yeah, Lindsey, and I think it's important also to note here, I mean, obviously it's not such an issue with runners that are coming from overseas, but in South Africa, this is a big thing, is that every running club has got a coach, every running club has a Comrades group that trains, and everybody tends to do what the group does. It, like, almost generally it doesn't matter what your ability is. It's like everybody does what the group does. And I've seen in the club that I'm in that everybody just does the same thing. It doesn't matter whether you're a silver runner or if you're a Vic Lapham runner. And a lot of these clubs are still, there's people in these clubs that believe that you need to run a 60 or 70K. And because everyone's doing it, you almost feel the pressure, the peer pressure, if you'd like, that you need to do it.
So let's just flip it around a little bit and look at it this way, because actually it just reminded me of actually what the real salient point to this is, and why I don't like actually being stuck on a number. And I've got 55 as the upper limit. But Brad, do you think that you experience 50 kilometers the same way that I experience 50 kilometers?
No, absolutely not. I mean,
So when you've seconded me when I've done 2 oceans as a training run, and I ran 4 hours and 24 minutes. Okay. You then ran 2 oceans the next day and ran. No.
I need to correct you. I've never run 2 oceans.
Okay, so now I'm using a bad example, but let's say you ran Comrades, you ran 2 oceans as a training run. Let's use Cape Town Marathon's the perfect example, because we both did it this year. So Cape Town, I ran a solid time, but I ran well within myself, and I ran 3 hours and 15 minutes. You ran 4 hours and 58 minutes. And who was more stuffed after that race? We ran the same distance. How long did it take you to recover?
I felt like I almost still feel like I've got long COVID, Lindsey, from it. No, it took me forever. I was sore. I was proper broken after it.
But this is the point that I'm making, is that, okay, if we did now an easy run and I ran 40 Ks easy, I'm going to be out there for just under 4 hours. You go and run that easy, you're going to be out there for almost 6 hours. So your exposure is so much longer. If we just look at it in relative terms, and that's back to the point why I really do prefer to use time as the measure, because you are still preparing yourself well enough. If I'm doing 4 hours and you're doing maybe a little bit more, 4.5 hours, but I'm doing 4 hours and you're doing 6 hours, because it's not the same. You are going to take longer and it's back to this point that I was trying to make, that now I just don't know why I forgot this way of explaining it. But the point I'm trying to make a few times in this series is that we are not all created equal when it comes to running. And that's why, if you are a Bill Rowan, but you're trying to follow a silver plan, that silver guy's doing his 45 Ks for 4 consecutive weeks, but he is doing that in 3.5 hours. So when you come along and you try and do it and you're doing 4.5 hours for 4 consecutive weeks, that's why you break down with injury. Okay. And so that's what I say to these people that feel the pressure, that want to go and run that long, and they go and follow the plan of the best runner in the club. I mean, that's, the best runner in the club has got a better chance of being successful on the slowest runner in the club's plan than the other way around.
Yeah. I shouldn't laugh, but that is the actual truth. And Lindsey, I mean, you say that the year that your worst Comrades, you did a 60, I think 64.
64, yeah.
I've never, ever, I've finished 3 Comrades. I've never run further than 50 Ks other than in Comrades. That's the furthest I've been. And I've only ever done that once. I finished 3 Comrades. Yeah.
So for my silvers, I never went beyond 50. Okay, I did do it on multiple occasions, but I didn't go further than 50 Ks for any of my silvers.
Super interesting. Let's just touch on where 2 Oceans is in the calendar for Comrades now and how that ties in, because there are going to be a lot of people running the Ultra as part of their Comrades training. Does that affect anything about where these races or your long runs need to be?
It absolutely does. the biggest effect that it has is that actually becomes your long run. Okay. So I can't stress this enough for people, is that if you want to do well at Comrades, Two Oceans has to be a training run. It cannot be a race. So the gap is now big enough, with it being the beginning of April, and where you can get people that want to do the double, a sub 5 Oceans, a sub 9 Comrades, a sub 4 Oceans, a silver medal Comrades. But when you're in that scenario, you have to accept that you are compromising Comrades. So you can absolutely do both of those two things, but you will never run your best Comrades like that, even with the big gap. And the reason, very simply, for that is because if you race Oceans, even more than I've stressed that you have to recover from your qualifying efforts, it's even more important that you qualify from your Two Oceans effort. So as soon as you do that, you're taking out a big chunk of peak training month, April. Okay. So Oceans the beginning of April. So that is a big chunk of peak training month is taken out of what you're doing. So how does that impact it? Well, Oceans becomes one of your 3. Okay. So you're probably then going to look at doing a marathon around about the 3rd of March as a training run, because that'll be your long run for Oceans. You'll do Oceans as a training run so that you only have a short bit of recovery after Two Oceans. Then you get back into normal training. But then, and this is important for me, then when you get to do your long Comrades run, you need to do 45 to maximum 50. I don't know why I even said that out loud, because now I know everyone's going to do 50. But everybody that I coach that does Two Oceans will do a 45K long run as their long run for Comrades, and it'll be a minimum of 4 weeks after Oceans, but probably 5 weeks after Oceans.
So you're looking there beginning of May, and then that's when things start slowly tapering down, but we'll get to that later on. But that's sort of where we're at. Yeah. All right, cool. That does make a lot of sense. Lindsey, the interesting thing with Oceans is the finish. I mean, you talk about running those runs at your Comrades like slower than your normal marathon time. I mean, to finish Oceans, you've got to go 7.5 minutes a K, which I think for sub 12-hour Comrades runners, I mean, that's on the limit. So it's difficult because, again, you're running at the best of your ability to finish that race when you shouldn't actually be. You should be running a little bit easier.
Yeah. So, and that'll take you literally into the same scenario as the people doing the double, is that people who want to do both, that are on the well, I can't find my words today, Brad, but that are on the edge, that are on the limit of their ability, are always going to be a little bit compromised. But what is super important in that scenario is that you make sure that you recover from Oceans. If you don't recover from Oceans, when you put yourself into that scenario, then you're in proper trouble for being injured and then definitely not being able to finish Comrades.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Lindsey, that's awesome. If you've got any questions, be sure to pop them into the forum on the Coach Parry app. If you need help with your training, jump in there as well. I'll pop the link to the Coach Parry Comrades Marathon Training Roadmap in the description of this podcast and video as well. We'd love to have you on there. We've got live stream strength classes. We've got weekly Q&As with our coaches. You can chat to one of the coaches daily if you'd like in the forum as well. Make sure that you get all the help you need when you need it, and training plans for all abilities as well. So we look forward to having you on there. Lindsey, as always, great to catch up. Thank you so much for your time today. And don't forget, if you do get any value out of these videos and podcasts, please do share them with your running club mates or your training group. And also, we'd love it if you'd leave us a review and a rating on whatever platform you do listen to. It does help other people find these podcasts as well, just like Alison Jeffries did as well. So thank you very much. From the two of us, it's cheers.